Today I want to walk you through how to draw all of the lowercase letters and then also walk you through where to add the thickness to turn them from a monoline script into faux calligraphy. So let's get started. All right, the first letter is the letter A. So this one is going to be an O form. So we start at the 2 o'clock position, work our way around just like we practiced, and then an underturn. And then we would add our thickness anywhere we're moving our pen down. So we're moving our pen down on this side of the A and on this side. So again, you've got an O form and an underturn. You'd add your thickness on both sides. Next is the letter B. I've taken some liberties to stylize these a little bit. So instead of the upstroke going this way, how it normally would, it's just flipped to go the other way. So it would be an upstroke or an entry stroke into an ascending loop, into an O form, and an upstroke. And this O form is a little bit different because you'll notice I started drawing it on the left side instead of the 2 o'clock position. And the reason for that is because we need the thickness to be on this side of the B. So if I drew the B or the O form like normal, and we did the thickness where it normally is, our B would look something like this, which would look a little bit off. So there's a few exceptions with the O form shape. It's on a B, a P, and a K. But again, you start at the waistline, you do this little entry stroke, upstroke, into the ascending loop, O form, and an upstroke. And then you're just going to add the thickness where you were moving your pen down. The next one is a C. This one starts at the 2 o'clock position, just like the O form, but instead of connecting it, you kick the bottom out to the right. And we're moving our pen down on this side, so that whole side would have a thickness. So 2 o'clock, kick it out to the right, and then add a thickness. Next is D. This one is going to be an O form and a downstroke and an underturn combined. And you'll notice as I'm drawing these letters that I'm lifting up my pen between each stroke. So I finish that stroke off and then I draw that one. So this isn't cursive where we're constantly leaving our pen down. We want to lift up our pen in between the strokes. For the E, this one will start about halfway between the waistline and the baseline, and we'll do a small loop and then kick the bottom out to the right. So it's very similar to the C and the O form, and it's probably very similar to how you already write an E. And it's this whole side that we're moving our pen down, so it'd be that whole side that has a thickness. Then if you flip your page over, we're gonna go on to the letter F. So this one starts at the baseline and it has kind of the same little entry stroke that the B had. And it goes into an ascending loop and a descending loop, all one motion, then lift up your pen, then an upstroke. In this whole side, we're moving our pen down, so that whole side would have a thickness. So again, start at the baseline, up to an ascending loop, descending loop, and an upstroke. Next is G. This one's going to be an O form, a descending loop, and an upstroke. And we're moving our pen down. If you're ever not sure where to add the thickness, just redraw it and see where you're moving your pen down, and that will let you know where you need to add a thickness. Next is an H. This one's going to be a downstroke and a compound curve. So we'll add our thickness here and a thickness here. Downstroke, compound curve, and add the thickness where you're moving your pen down. Next is I. This one is going to be like an underturn. This one's really easy because it's a basic stroke with a dot on it. So you've already done this one lots of times. That one should be really easy to do. Next is a J. This one is also pretty easy. It's a descending loop and an upstroke, and we're moving our pen down on this side. So that's where our thickness would be. descending loop, upstroke, dot it, and add your thickness. Next is a K. This one is going to be a downstroke. And then this little portion is kind of like a downstroke. And this is kind of like an underturn. We're kind of squishing this in to the basic strokes. And this diagonal part, we are moving our pen down a little bit at the top, so you could add a thickness. I do know a lot of lettering artists and calligraphers who don't add a thickness to the top of that K. They just leave it. So that one's kind of up to you. Then this page is done. I'm going to set it to the side. I'm going to go on to the next page. I'm going to go to the letter L. This one is an ascending loop and an underturn, and we're going to do it all in one motion. This whole side is where we're moving our pen down, so that whole side will have a thickness to it. So ascending loop with an underturn, add the thickness. Next is an M. This one is going to be an overturn, and a compound curve. And we're moving our pen down here, and in the middle of this compound curve. N is very similar. It's going to be an overturn and a compound curve. And we're moving our pen down here and the center of the compound curve. The letter O is very similar to the O form. We'll do an O form first, and then we'll just add in a comma dot. So we'll add our thicknesses. And really the thickness on the comma dot a lot of times it's created almost just by the overlapping of those lines. You can add a little bit of thickness there, but it's kind of the thickness is already there because it's overlapping with the O form, if that makes sense. P is going to be a downstroke, an O form that starts on the left side, and a stylized upstroke. We'll add our thicknesses. Again, long downstroke, O form, upstroke. And I'm lifting up my pen in between strokes. And again, anywhere I'm moving down is where I'm going to be adding a thickness. Next is Q. This one is going to be an O form, a reflected descending loop. The loop is pointing that way instead of this way, and an upstroke. So we'll just add our thickness. We're moving our pen down, O form, reflected descending loop, upstroke, and lift your pen between strokes. From here, turn the page over. We're on to R. R is what is called an outlier letter, meaning that it's using strokes. It has portions of its letter that aren't made up of basic strokes. So for this one, we do start with an upstroke, which we already know, but we're going to extend it above the waistline. And then from here, we kind of come down to a little diagonal, and then we go into an underturn. And it's this whole side of the R that's going to have the downstroke. So upstroke, have a thickness, a little diagonal, and an underturn. So that one is a good one to trace and practice a little bit because it's not totally based on the basic strokes. The next one is the letter S. This one again is an outlier letter. It starts with an upstroke that goes above the waistline, and then it's going to come down and you'll do a small loop and come back up. A cursive S looks like this. So we're basically just adding the loop in, and then this whole side is where our thickness would be because that's where we're moving our pen down. And it is important proportionally to bring the R and the S above this waistline so that they proportionally match up with the rest of the letters. Next is T. This one is going to be a downstroke and an underturn combined, and then what's called a crossbar. And this whole side, we're moving our pen down, so that's where our thickness would be. So downstroke and underturn with crossbar, and add the thickness. The letter U, this one is going to be two underturns together, and we just add our thickness where we're moving our pen down. So again, if you're ever wondering where do I add the thickness, it's where you're moving your pen down. V is going to be a compound curve and a comma dot. So we'll add our thickness in the middle and a tiny thickness on the comma dot. Compound curve, comma dot, thickness in the middle, and on the comma dot. W is going to be a compound curve, an underturn, and a comma dot. And add our thickness in. Set that paper to the side, and we have only 3 more letters. X is another one of those outlier letters. It starts with a portion of a compound curve. So if we were to cut off the top and the bottom of this compound curve, that's the first kind of stroke we start with. And then we just cross it with a diagonal, almost crossbar type of line. And it's only this center portion of the compound curve that we're moving our pen down. So that's the portion that would have a thickness. And for X's, they're just a fun letter to extend above and below. But really, I mean, they could go right to the waistline and right to here if you wanted to. But I like to extend them a little bit more. Next is the letter Y. This one is a compound curve with a descending loop and an upstroke. And we'll add our thicknesses in. So again, we're moving our pen down in the middle of this compound curve and on this whole right side of the Y. The last letter is the letter Z, and we're kind of squeezing this into the basic strokes. It's kind of like an overturn and kind of like a descending loop, but a little more loopy, and an upstroke. And then we'll just add our thicknesses on this right side where we were moving our pen down. And we're still lifting our pen between strokes. So the ones that have a little bit of uniqueness to them, the X, the Z, and the R, and the S, those ones are good to practice a little bit with the tracing so that you kind of get a good feel for how to draw them.